Hey, this is Dawn Marie Solis with Neuro Awesome Life and Neuro Awesome Life Conversations, and I am so excited to be here with Dr. Tabia Lee. She is a professor and educator and advocate and amazing human being that I'm so excited to be getting to know. We are going to be talking about some really interesting things today, but I kind of want to start, Dr. Lee, by mentioning that one of the first things that drew you to my heart is that one of your degrees is in sociology, but specifically social deviance.
Mm-hmm.
And that made me so happy. We need to come back to that someday, or maybe you can tuck that perspective into today, because that's like where I live. I want to break all the systems. I want to break all the rules. Yeah, that's where I live. Your work now focuses on preparing K through 12 and higher ed faculty to work with diverse students. And folks, I am doing my best to quote a piece of Dr. Lee's bio, but I stutter and there are words in here that I can't say. So I'm gonna give this a try, right? Be to work with K-12 and higher ed faculty so that they understand how to work with diverse students by better understanding the pedagogy and the curriculum implications of ideology in practice.
Yes.
And unless you kind of steep in that tea, you might not have any idea of what I just said or what that means. So we're going to talk about that a little bit, but we're going to bring it into lived experience and day to day. And, what does it mean to be in community with the fact of our gorgeously diverse population? Civil discourse, connected, compassionate, able to say differing opinions without wanting to cancel each other. Something you have, unfortunately, direct experience with. So Dr. Lee, I want to let you take over for a bit and give us a little bit more background about you and how you came to this work and where your energies are, and kind of lead us on that journey.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Dawn. I'm just thrilled to be here with you today and to have a conversation. We scheduled it up and we managed to do it, so I'm just thankful for that. I feel like we've accomplished something just with scheduling, because there's so much going on for both of us, at this time. So I'm a lifelong teacher. I've been teaching my whole life. And usually people say, when I say that, but literally when I was in elementary school, I was in a gifted and talented program and they didn't really know what to do with us. So I spent a lot of time playing Oregon Trail and being utilized as a peer tutor. So I consider that me teaching, even at a very young age as a learner myself. And I've always kind of thought of myself as a teacher learner, and that's just stuck with me throughout my whole life and my career trajectory. I actually became a formal teacher, after I got my bachelor's degree. I did focus on sociology with an emphasis in social deviance. It was something that's very interesting to me. As someone who has, been outside for some portions, of my life, and that experience, teasing and bullying, when I was in elementary school, I was just drawn to the topic, and it kind of stuck through even the things that I did later on. So I went to Los Angeles, and I from Central Valley, so very different world, and big city, but I went there to be in the Los Angeles Unified School District teacher training program. And then I became an actual, teacher, and I served in East LA public middle schools for 10 years. Really enjoyed my work there. I worked with gifted English language learners. And part of my, as I mentioned, I'm always teaching and learning and sharing knowledge with my peers. part of the work there was to help teachers to understand giftedness as a neurodiversity, and to recognize that it's something that's translingual, because this was during the time of English only education in California. It was like legislated and required, and they had stamped out like bilingualism and multiple languages. And, you know, some people really had this belief that if you weren't proficient in English, like you couldn't possibly be gifted. And I was like, no, 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 you know, this is something that is translingual, and, you know, gifted students have, you know, needs academically, socially, emotionally. And so I was really working to just humanize the discourse around that, and to, you know, my students were just simply amazing. We did a lot of work around, like, I was teaching civics, social studies, and English. So we would hold these community panels, and, you know, they were more insightful than a lot of the adults who came. These are middle school students to the meetings, you know. And so it was work that was very fulfilling for me, and that I just truly loved doing. You know, I got my doctorate, and then I decided, you know, I'm going to finally travel. So I traveled outside of the US for the first time, and like went to all these places that I had studied but never, you know, gotten to go to, because in 6th grade I was teaching world history. So I traveled to Egypt, I went to Malta, you know, like in all these places I had just read about in the books, and always said, I want to go there someday. And I actually got to do it. And then I did some volunteer teaching in Georgia, which a post-Soviet nation in the Caucasus region. And that was just amazing. And I had like a host family, and, you know, got to really learn about the Georgian culture and people and their struggle for freedom and liberation. And so it was just, came back here to the US. Job search didn't go like I thought it was going to go. You know, you get your doctorate and you're like, oh yeah, I'm going to just like be a professor. And I ended up adjunct teaching for many years, part-time, and for a long time. And then I have my little educational consultancy where I actually, it's more knowledge generation. You know, I would go to like conferences, and present at them, writing papers, things of that nature. And that just led me, you know, onward. After no full-time positions came from my part-time ones, I started looking outside of, you know, those sectors. And I said, you know, I really want to get back to public education, because I was part-timing in like private colleges. They were the only ones who would accept my work and my approach. These are private Catholic universities and colleges, because they were really committed to social justice. Now everyone says social justice, and it's like a buzzword. Every college is committed to it, you know, but these were colleges that had, you know, hundreds of years of doing, you know, that work. And so my approach was welcomed, you know, but just couldn't land that full time. So I went back to a public sector during the pandemic. I had a 1-year full-time temporary position at a community college. And when that came to a close, I was like, this whole world was opened, you know, to me. And I was like, I have to apply to others. Like I want to stay in community college. And it was like my life was coming full circle, because as a middle school and high school student, I took classes at my local community college. And it really helped shape who I am now as a scholar, and help rescue me from those high school years. You know, it just kind of didn't fit in the high school, you know, things that happened in high school. I was like, I gotta accelerate out of here. And so, you know, my community college, I was one of the early community dual enrollment students, they call them now. It's like common, but I had to get like special permission from my principal and like my parents, and they were worried about my social development and, you know, all of these things. Now it's like just regular, you know, people do that. But so I applied at De Anza. for this faculty director for Office of Equity, Social Justice, and Multicultural Education. It took me so long to be able to say that full title. Like I literally practiced it because it's one of the longest titles I've ever seen or had. And the responsibilities of it were massive as well. As a single faculty member, I was to lead an institution-wide transformation around those three topics. And in a way, it's a culmination of like, you know, my life's work, you know, everything that I've been working on: social justice, multicultural education, equity. And so I was just thrilled to start there and to begin that work. And that's where I am now. And I still do my consultancy. But again, it's more like paper writing, conference presenting, stuff like that.
Thank you for all of that. That was fun. I have so many questions that we're not going to have time to do today. So we're going to have to do this again. In terms of your work helping people understand how to negotiate diverse populations, you know, we're in a moment right now that is unique and is not unique, in my personal opinion. I don't think there's a moment in history where people haven't been canceled, quite literally, in all the ways one can cancel a human. But we're doing it in ways that I think are just really harmful right now. It's like family infighting, right?
Mm-hmm.
When the aunts and uncles and cousins can't get along, there's such a schism in the family and huge trauma. And I feel like that's kind of the environment we're in right now, that socially and politically we're having a family fight, like a deep personal divide in bonds that should never be broken. And I don't know if that's making too much sense. Maybe you can help me with that, but the idea of benefiting from diversity is being challenged in ways right now that I feel are really depressing and scary. And we don't have, you know, you talked about being devoted to public education. Thank you for doing that, because I left public education because I wasn't being allowed to help students learn to think for themselves. I wasn't being allowed to bring in diverse literature. You know, I had a very narrow number of British, toss in a couple of European and American authors, right? There's a very narrow whites only perspective on what middle school and high school English class should look like. But the only place I could dribble somebody else in was in the poetry world, because they don't care what you teach poetry. It's so sad, but like they don't like if you're teaching literature, there's at least there used to be a super narrow definition of that. And I got myself in trouble all the time. And so the idea that you're finding a way to stay devoted to the public sector, because oh my God, it needs people like you. Students need people like you. How challenging is that? Like you're devoted to this work of helping people understand living in community and diversity at the same time. How hard is that?
It's very challenging work, but very rewarding work. You know, when you can bring together people who, you know, have strongly held opinions and, you know, different, I call them ideologies, mental frameworks, ways of thinking, knowing and being. I mean, however you would like to like use that word. I just use that as an overarching term. When you can bring together people who maybe wouldn't even talk to each other. That's kind of how the climate is nowadays, because, they perceive that, that person may be different, or, they're thinking in a way that's not my way. I like to bring people together that have that feeling, and to create, like, I call them containers for a dialogue to take place. Not a debate, like not a discussion, but a dialogue where we're creating this flow of meaning between and through each other. And that's something that I've done throughout, my career. I have a lot of training and background in doing that. And then helping people to identify points of commonality. Even when you initially come into a conversation saying, no, we're not going to have anything in common, or, like we have those preconceived notions. How do we break down that barrier to be able to just hear and listen and accept, the opinions of others that may be different. And when I say accept, it doesn't mean adopt. It just means acceptance, welcomingness, an acknowledgement of another person and their perspective. And we can acknowledge too that we may be different, but then we also have too some points that we can agree on, or that even from our, different camps, or however you want to view those things, that we can identify some things that will help us to like best serve our students and the communities that we're in, especially at the public college and university sector, because, those are community schools. It's there for everyone. And so I feel like those should be spaces in particular where we're not having situations where a singular ideology is being pushed or adopted or demanded of people, because there's just such diversity already in the community. And it's weird, Don, because I've encountered some people recently who have literally said, like, I believe your position there shouldn't even exist. Like it shouldn't even be anything. That whole diversity, equity, and inclusion stuff is a distractor. It's dividing. Like they're very strongly believe that, and so it's like, wow, how do you counter that if that's a strongly held opinion? And so I feel like there's many of us with these views, and if we're just ignoring each other and shouting out, like what our perspective is, then what does that get for all of us in the end? Like how is that helping everyone in the end to just, each of us has a megaphone and we're yelling what our perspective is, but we're never listening to others who are different. And so therefore we can't learn, from a different perspective. So I really just like to create those spaces where we can hear multiple perspectives. That's been something I've been just really committed to my whole life. And I appreciate what you said too, about the students. Students really see and value and appreciate that kind of approach. It's the adults and administrators, right? Sometimes who get in the way of that kind of potential progress, because they're wanting to shape and mold even the students and what they think in a particular way, and to frankly indoctrinate them in a particular way. And when you start talking about diversity of thought and different opinions, that gets in the way of that kind of agenda or mission.
I had experience that you mentioned early on when you were talking about how, in the 80s and 90s, there was this huge push to nationalize and homogenize language. And so that anybody who possibly even spoke with an accent, especially if it was a Central or South American accent, was seen as intellectually lacking. There was a direct link to being Black or brown specifically, and intellect. That wasn't unique to the 80s and 90s, but was starting to become Like, yeah, we got rid of Jim Crow and we started replacing it with education reform. Where the the facade of inclusion was pasted over a continuation of control, the concept of colonizing, and the homogenation into color blindness, right? We're going to all pretend we're exactly the same. Our communities are the same, our cultures are the same, our language is the same, we all have the same perspectives, we all come from the same family, everything looks identical. It is the assembly line of humanity, right? Everything that plops off the end is the same. And with that still being promoted, so when we get educated K-12, the right answer, right? We're always looking for the quote unquote right answer. So nuanced thinking, differing perspectives, things like that don't fit into a standardized system. So we get taught from the age of, around 4 or 5 years old up through 17, 18 years old that sameness is the goal. And then we ask these young people to go into an environment that's supposed to be free your mind, right? Like go to university, travel the world, like experience. And they're absolutely unprepared for that experience. But so are their professors and so are their administrators, because we've been through decades of this sameness indoctrination. So there's my opinion. Mm-hmm. I'd love to hear your thought.
I mean, I think I see definite there's salience in what you have to say there. And part of my work and my mission, I mean, you mentioned in the beginning that social deviance was, is one of my things that I've always held as central to who I am. And so my early work and my work in K through 12 teaching was about resisting that type of standardization of humanity. It was about bringing compassion and empathy to the forefront of all interactions. It was about not getting the right answers, but asking great questions and questioning everything, including whatever I said. That's what I sought to instill in my students. So I've always been against the grain. My dissertation, when I did my doctorate, was on No Child Left Behind, the human fallout and the impact on students and teachers in urban environments. And so I've always been someone who sees the harmful effects that can result from attempting to, make everyone be the same and learn the same and exist in the world the same. That's always been something that I've just stridently resisted and encouraged my students to actively resist and to, counter and to question and just keep asking questions. So I've always been an anomaly, but that's been my way of teaching and learning. And that's what I also have always tried to foster with my students and fellow educators. So I think that's so important because what we have now is we're starting to see the outcomes of standardization, of dehumanizing education, of taking the craft of teaching out of the hands of teaching professionals and putting it into the hands of people who have no background in pedagogy, who aren't thinking of developmental appropriateness, who are pushing agendas, through the schools instead of learning, and how to learn, and thinking about things like metacognition. How do I think about my thinking? Those are things that I have always tapped into with my students and learners. And I think that's so powerful, especially in a world like today, when you're able to step back and analyze the situation as a learner, and to identify when these harmful, threads of standardization ideology, if you will, I'm just making that up literally in the moment, but I think it's a very real thing, are bleeding through. And the structure of the activities that are done, as you mentioned, looking for the right answer. What is that even? So I want people to just step back always and question, when something's even happening in a classroom, what's the goal of this? And as a learner, does my professor even notice themselves, what they're doing in the moment, and the impact that it's having on me and my peers, and so those are the kinds of things that I want people to start thinking about, and that's when I talk about ideology and practice. It's literally that awareness that in every moment, every interaction, we are embodying, expressing, enacting an ideology of some kind, and the more we can become consciously aware of that, the better we can connect with each other, and especially when we can start naming these things, and then we can have richer dialogue with each other, and greater possibility to break out of this standardization and homogenization of thinking and learning that we're stuck in the moment right now in many places.
I don't know that we intended to get sort of education systems based, but that is my happy place. So I've been trying to do education differently my whole life. It is my belief that I was the first design your own degree student at the University of Maryland in College Park, because they had no idea what to do with me. I have an English degree technically, but almost all of my 11th grade, dyslexia, dyscalculia. All of my junior and senior year in college were devoted to learning styles, alternative ways of thinking. And I'm old enough that I was quite ahead of that curve. So I couldn't even find professors who were interested in helping me do my independent studies. But I knew I was a different learner. And I knew that I had been shamed and blamed for being a different learner, even in university. And literally from my earliest memories, I would stand up for the person who was getting the hard time, whether from fellow children or from adults. And so I'm just wired to try to figure out how to do it better. How do we find ways to enjoy our differences and benefit from our differences, as opposed to be so afraid of them? And from my perspective, that's what it is. It's fear. Hatred is fear made aggressive and weaponized. Again, my opinion. And so my whole world is around, how do I help people who have, from their perspective, legitimate, logical, personal experience-based reasons to be so terrified they're willing to hate. And I don't personally see a way of helping us as humanity if we're unwilling to understand the source of the fear. If we're not willing to see it as fear instead of hatred, because hatred is the expression we see and experience, right? In systems, in personal interactions, and all of it, right? Hatred is what we see and what we experience. But fear is its root cause. And if we can't acknowledge that it's fear, it's a sense of lack of resources. It's a sense of if you get space, I get less. That constant sense of imbalance that we've all been indoctrinated to believe. That if one person has that, absolutely means somebody else can't have it, right? So intelligence is suspect. Capability is suspect. Class is suspect. Everything becomes suspect. And there's a difference between questioning everything and being suspicious of everything. Questioning everything, from my perspective, is I want to understand. Whether I end up agreeing or not, I want to understand. So I'm going to question. Being suspect is I'm afraid of everything, and so I may not have the ability to work to understand, because understanding threatens me in my survival, in my care of those I perceive as mine. And to me, that's so much of what we're experiencing right now. And to me, it's rooted in how we teach people to be. We teach people to be right, not to question. We teach people to be right, not to be connected, right? Rightness in school is cover your paper, don't share your answers. Connected is I might know a thing that could help you. You might know a thing that could help me, right? We do not learn how to be in community with one another. We learn how to defend ourselves against each other. And then we grow up into adults. And now we're canceling each other in theoretical and real ways. And part of the reason why I was so excited to talk to you is because you're literally working on a daily basis to figure out with your fellow human beings, how do we stop being so afraid of each other? And with our words and our actions, committing violence against one another. How do you present to, you've got a fresh classroom of either young adult students or more seasoned adult students. How do you present to folks someone else's being and ideas in this space cannot threaten you?
I think it's so important, and something that I thought of as you were speaking, Dawn, this concept of intellectual or epistemic humility. I think that that's something that's so key, and something that I've always tapped into in the way I structure my classroom environment or any kind of learning situation. This idea that none of us knows everything, and being able to identify what are our strengths that we're coming into a situation with, and what are some areas that we are working on, and how are we working on those areas, but that none of us has the answer or the right answer. I really focus on taking an inquiry-based approach to learning and teaching, and modeling that for my students, and that we're co-learners in a situation. Again, I realize, and especially nowadays, I realize that my approach isn't something that was widespread or being used in many places. And the societal effects is something that I appreciate you touching on, because when we have grown up and been essentially raised up in these situations where we're taught to be right and get the right answer and defend your position, those are all valuable skills. I'm not by any means saying that people shouldn't learn how to debate, but that's all we've focused on. And the detriment is this disconnection from one another, this want to always be right and prove myself that I'm the right one. We don't even listen. So I talk a lot of times about like active listening. How do we do that? And so some of it's process. These are things that can be taught. It's not something that it's like, oh, it's too late because now we're here in this situation, and isn't it terrible? There are tools and resources and processes that can be taught. It's literally takes sometimes, I'm just one teacher, an individual teacher, to recognize those things and implement them and start to use them so that we are working from spaces of love and compassion and acceptance instead of, hatred, fear, and tolerance, which I think is a big issue. And so I just, that's something that I think raising awareness that there are these tools. There's things like nonviolent communication, universal design for learning, all of these things where we can create, learning environments that are empowering and welcoming and, where everyone feels like they can be their most authentic self without judgment. I think that's so key. And there are, I just have to believe that there are other teachers, out there doing it quietly, even in today's world. But I just hope more of us will start to say, hey, I'm going to share this with my peers and spread that wider, because it's so needed, especially in today's climate. We've seen what happens when we do the opposite and on a mass scale, and that's where we're at in today's world. Every time I turn on the TV or news or anything, I see someone being canceled, and being eliminated. It happens all over the place. It's not just one group or another group. Like it's happening, so much. Like where the wind blows, you may be at risk of being canceled tomorrow, so then there's this censoring that happens, of people because I don't want to be canceled, I want to keep working and being productive in the world. And so again, there's that fear that can take hold and start to determine your life trajectory and, the things you say and don't say and all of that. And so, there are solutions, there are tools, there are ways through. I think just elevating those and actual teachers starting to speak up again and saying, let us teach. There's a scholarship of teaching and learning, used to be very productive. We need that back in so many spaces again. And for teachers not to feel afraid that if they have an idea or a process or a way of connecting people and helping us to be in community, that they're not going to be canceled, or vilified or, shunned, because, it's a threat to people who really want and need to keep us divided. And they need those divisions to exist and those boxes, for us to look at our box, accept our box, and stay in our box, because that's how the system keeps rolling right along, and doing the dehumanizing work that is currently at work. So I just think that people connecting, talking, raising awareness is key, and using the tools that we have that are great tools, that I wouldn't say they've been discarded, but they're there and no one's kind of picking it up and using it, because every signal in the environment tells the individual teacher, like, don't you do that because, you know, your test scores in your class will go down, right? Potentially. And that's how we're measuring your success. So I think there's an issue with how we're even measuring success. And that, and accountability and so forth, that creates a constraint on everyone, right? Because if your numbers aren't up, and we're not working with numbers, we're working with people. But if those numbers are slipping and, you know, whatever happens, there's consequences that could be grave for the teacher in that environment. So it's like there's a system that needs to be restructured on accountability, and on how we measure, quote, success. And that's a big constrainer for so many people, because that's how funding's received. You know, that's how the livelihood of the structures flourishes or doesn't. And so look where it's gotten us, though. I mean,
Yeah.
look.
I'm so with you on all of that. Thinking about my personal and professional focus of the neurodivergent community, so people who are autistic, ADHD, dyslexic, Tourette's, the list of neurodivergent identities. I know that especially for those of us who are autistic, the idea of questioning everything can be both the way we're naturally wired and the most terrifying thing in the world, right? Because so I'm autistic, dyslexic, and a bunch of other things. My autistic brain likes sameness and is really seeking all the time to understand the right way. And so for me, that's very individualized. I'm very happy to have the right way be unique to every human on the planet. I don't need a one size fits all. I actually reject that intensely. But I can imagine that some of the folks who are going to hear our conversation are going to go, you're asking me to not pick a side, pick a camp, and listen to everyone. And now I'm going to go hide under the covers and melt down because my brain wiring needs a structure, needs an A, B to B to C path, needs sameness. How do I live in a world that requires me to understand all of these differences when I'm wired for sameness? And so, you know, part of what I think I'm hearing from you is at the very same time where we're encouraging people to question, listen, and all of those things, we also have to acknowledge who the people are that are either speaking or listening.
Mm-hmm.
We have to be more willing to know we are the human species, but we come in a zillion different varieties. There's being trauma informed, right? So many of us in the neurodivergent community, and that is extra exemplified by the intersectionality of all of the different types and cultures of people, right? Trauma is something that we are almost automatically put into at our earliest stages because the world isn't designed yet for differences. We have the same problem in education for the gifted and talented as we do for intellectual disabilities. Not enough understanding, almost no legitimate, helpful research, and very, very few people interested in doing the work in a committed and connected way, right? We have all of these different things that for the focus of my community, my work, I think can make what you and I are talking about at the same time really exciting. Yes, could somebody notice I exist as a unique human being and attune to my needs, but I don't have the spoons and I'm so trauma laden that I can't worry about your needs. I can't worry about your differences.
Mhm.
Do you have any thoughts on how to begin to help in a space like that, where folks have they're literally filled to the top of their head with just managing their own space?
Mm.
Now you and I are asking them to consider that other people belong as well. And now their head's just going to explode. Never mind, you've added one more thing. Never mind. Do you have any thoughts about how to help in those situations?
You know, I was just I'm picking up as you were talking from, it sits here on my desk. It's a Patricia Denning's book, The Trauma Sensitive Classroom, and she really talks about compassion and, you know, how do we recognize suffering in others, and mindfulness as a tool for that. And I just want to share it because I have this page bookmarked, and I really do refer to this a lot. I'm just going to share an excerpt. It says, "We may not have the means to help, but our compassionate presence and the recognition of suffering can be supportive in and of itself." And she talks about how compassion has these cognitive or mind-based, affective, feeling-based, and behavior action-based elements. And she says it has 6 attributes: sensitivity, sympathy, empathy, motivation, caring, distress tolerance, and non-judgment. And so when we intentionally enact that in our learning space, I literally just pulled it from right here because I use this as a resource all the time, and just as a reminder to me to help keep me centered. You know, sometimes the help that someone needs is not a solution that we're enacting onto them. It's just a beingness, an awareness, an acceptance, a listening, a recognition of and hearing and acknowledging of the suffering that someone is enduring. And how do we do that? We have to have a practice as educators of mindfulness, of awareness, and it's not just something that we, you know, do with a Go Noodle video, you know, that we play for our students and say, let's have a mindfulness break. You know, there's a lot of that right now, but there's not a lot of people actually practicing and engaging, being in community with myself, and acceptance of myself helps me to better connect with and create safe spaces of welcomingness and belongingness for the learners who are in the learning environment. And it has to be something that we're intentional about. Now, there's lots of people saying, you know, what to do with DEI and how to do it and all that. By no means am I saying like that's the solution, because I don't think there's any one solution. But if someone was struggling with that particular issue of, you know, the trauma that, you know, some of us are carrying with us daily that we haven't possibly potentially worked through or started to work through, it has to happen here first before we can open our hearts to our students, to our communities, and to being fully present in those spaces in every way that that means. And it's not something that we just get. It's something that we practice with intention. And it's not like in a book. It's not something that we can give to our students. It's a way of being in the world. And it's a daily practice that we're engaging in within ourselves, because we have to heal within first before we can be healers and you know, have that healing capacity for our communities. So that would be, maybe that's not the best answer.
I love what you said. I'm in a very simplistic way, if I'm hearing you well. If I'm feeling so much of my own stuff. And I don't feel I can hear your stuff. And I might even have tipped over into the space of, I don't even feel you have rights to your stuff. My stuff is so fundamental and baked into the system and part of my everyday life that not only do I not care about your stuff, but I don't think you have rights to it. The place we may need to start is there, that allowing somebody the at least intellectual permission within ourselves to exist with their stuff. I'm not required to hear their stuff. I'm not required to fix their stuff. I'm not required to like their stuff. But maybe step one to figuring out how to live with each other successfully is, while I heal, I give at least intellectual, if not emotional, permission to others to be on their healing journey.
Yes.
And there's something really profound that happens when we can make not space within us so much. And I think that's part of what's hard. If I have to listen to somebody else's stuff, if I have to like give their stuff legitimacy, that takes up room in my already cramped, traumatized, too much space, right? In order to let somebody intellectually have space, I can think of it as space here, right next to me. If you can't see what I'm gesturing, it's near me. It's not on top of me.
Right. Yes.
And if we can kind of process that, what does that look and feel like in my own life that somebody, not only do I disagree with, but I have visceral, deep reactions to who they appear to be and what they're talking about, right? How on earth are you going to ask me to make space for them? Don't make space for them in your own being. Right. Not as step one.
Right. Yeah.
But if we're going to not literally blow each other up, they have to be able to stand intellectually near us with our permission, or we won't be able to tolerate the existence of other people. Literally, we won't be able to tolerate it. It will affect us emotionally, physically, mentally, all of the things. We will feel the illness and the oppression of their existence. And so to me, if I'm hearing you well, step one is do your healing journey, find your community, travel your path. You do not have to chain yourself to the path of somebody else in order to be a good human.
Yeah. Yes.
But in order for us to make any progress, we have to allow for multiple journeys coexisting.
Yes.
We're teensy bit over time, and I want to respect that you have other things that you need to get to. Is there anything that sort of comes to you to say as a parting word? I hope we will do this again, so it won't be our final word, but as a parting word for today.
You know, Dawn, I just want to say thank you for sharing this space with me, for our conversation. I have felt enlightened and uplifted by it. And I hope that, you know, the listeners also will take something away, you know, that is meaningful and helpful on their own journey. And this is just a very special space that you have here. And thank you for inviting me to be a part of it.
Yeah, I'm going to try to not be emotional about that. That meant a lot to me. Thank you. I so respect you and value who you are and what you're working to accomplish in the world. As an autistic person, I can quickly fangirl. I can get very, very, very happy with people that I cherish, and you are one of those people. So thank you for what you said. Thank you for sharing your perspectives and your heart's desire, your soul here. I think if folks can let what you've said kind of sink in a little bit, we're going to start finding ways in which we can at least work near each other, if not quite yet with each other. Step one, right? Let's be near one another. And maybe we'll start feeling a lightening of the burden.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
We mutually heal when we can release some of that protectiveness that our fears and our traumas and our indoctrinations have put upon us.
Yeah.
And so thank you. Thank you for your time, your perspective. And I hope we'll do this again.
Definitely. Talk to you soon.